Welcome, Patriots, to Patriot Life with Candace Keller. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited today about the podcast. It's going to be a great podcast. So I just want to remind you, when you go to patriotamerica76.com, you can find out about our anti-mandatory vaccination cards and our face mask cards that will tell you the law about what is going on right now in our nation. I am hitting the road, heading to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to do a pastor's seminar, and getting ready to go up to Vandalia. So we've got a lot of Patriot Americas coming up. I am very excited about my guest today. This is Harald Zieger, and he is, I just want to do a little intro on him. I first met him about 3 or 4 months ago. I was at a Tea Party meeting. I was speaking, and then I sat down, and so he stood up, and I just thought he was some regular guy in the audience. And I'll never forget what you said. You said, "You don't even realize what's happening here." And then you said, "Get your kids out of public school."
Get your kids out of school.
Yeah. So then I found out that Harald was an author, and he wrote a book called Freedom's Nightmare, which is not in print any longer. So I got online. I paid $90 for this book. Did
goodness.
You know? And then we hit the road. Kent and I hit the road, and we drove to New Orleans for 13 hours. And I read 200 pages of this book. And then we hit the road, went to Tampa, and I continued reading on. So I couldn't wait to get back here. And I wanted to read the book before I met with you. We've been trying to get together for a while. And first of all, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. And so, and you're an Ohio guy, right? You
Yes.
live in Ohio.
Yes.
And I got to tell you, your story, I didn't want to talk to you before I read it. There's so much. So I want to spend this first podcast just kind of letting people know who you are. So in the book, you talk about, you grew up under communism.
Yes.
And in East Germany, you were
Yes.
born after the war, of course.
Yes.
You're not very, we're about the same age, actually. And your father was from, your father was from Germany, is that right? Or you're Poland? Your father was
No, my father was an Austrian citizen.
Austrian, and your mother was Polish.
My mother was German.
German, okay.
But where she was born, that is Polish today.
Okay.
So that was Germany until the end of the war.
Okay. And when you start off in the book, you lay a real foundation of, I wanted to go really slow because it's rather complicated to grow up under communism. When you're an American, it's a lot to take in. And I kept reading to my husband about it and everything. But to learn who you are, can you just talk about your childhood and what it was like to grow up the way that you grew up?
Yeah, I usually say if you want to get the whole story, you need to read the book. And the problem is it's out of print. So I understand that people are curious to know how that is. But it is kind of a lengthy thing to talk about. But just to make it short, it is growing up in a communist country is like you have no rights at all. The government decide what your rights are. It's not like in the United States where your Constitution or Declaration of Independence actually says that all men are endowed by their Creator with a number of unalienable rights. Communists don't consider a Creator. You are the result of a lightning strike that hit a slug mouth, and that's where life started, right? And then finally the apes were smart enough to crawl down from the trees and start to walk. That's the communist creation. And based on that, you have no rights which the government don't give you. So I usually, when somebody asks me, what is that? I say, you don't even own your cat. It's not yours. Right? If government decides they need the cats for something, they will all be confiscated. So as a child, I not really realized that restriction, because as a child you have a totally different mindset for your days they run, and school was very consuming. Now the communists in East Germany had that one huge package on their back. There was another Germany which was different, where people had freedom, where people could realize their dreams, where people were able to strive for whatever they wanted. And that comparison was, for many Germans, visible for the East Germans, right? So they had to fight that constantly. And the only way they really had to do that was to indoctrinate the coming generations as deep and far as they could with that communist ideology.
Okay.
Right? And that indoctrination was enormous. I mean, just to give you an example, when we did math, for example, we did not, and text calculation, right? We did not have some, let's say, you go to the store and you buy 5 apples and you come home and there are still 3 apples in the basket, and you put the 5 apples in. How many apples do you have now? No. There were 5 traitors discovered by the safety and security police, and they were put into jail, where 3 others were already. How many traitors are now in jail, right? Something like that.
Okay.
So it was never just some education somehow. It was always focused on everything was focused.
Okay, for those who are younger than us, the way that your situation occurred was after the war, Germany was split in half and a wall was built, right? A wall was built down the middle called the Berlin Wall.
It was actually more complicated than that. After the war, so the 4 Allied powers, France, Great Britain, America, and the Soviet Union, decided to separate Germany in military occupation zones. And there were 4 military occupation zones: the French, the British, and the American, and then the Soviet Union. The Soviet occupation zone was the largest. And the 3 Western powers, right after or very soon after the end of the war, Patton said it in I don't know if you remember that movie. General Patton said it very clearly: we slaughtered the wrong swine or pig or whatever you want to call it. So they realized that they made the wrong deal with the Soviet Union, and they separated, and it was very clear within a few years that the Soviet Union wanted to have installed a communist system, Soviet-style system, in all of Germany. Okay. And they used the German Communist Party to promote that. But that didn't work out because the Western allies combined their territory, installed a government, and that was the separation.
Okay, and then Italy was stayed with the Soviets, or did they bow out?
Italy was not a partner at all.
Okay.
So what happened then was also Berlin was separated into 4 different occupation zones, and while Germany and West Germany and East Germany was already separated in the early 50s by a wall, by a fence and military, Berlin was still open. And that happened, that was till 1961, August 13th, when they built the wall.
Right. Okay, you say in the book, and you're an engineer.
Yes.
And so you start off the book talking a lot about the way businesses were taken down.
Yeah.
And you said, one thing you say is the real reason for economic collapse of the system was the disability of the total centralized control of the manufacturing processes to produce the wealth necessary to keep up with social programs.
Right.
So when I read this was a red flag for me because I feel like this is what is happening here in our nation. You went on to talk about, well, we'll stop right there. You talk. I got up to the part about the Berlin Wall and the brown shirts are the same as the blue shirts and all that.
Yeah.
So when you stood up at that meeting where we were, because prior to this, there was a booming society, and then everything came to a screeching halt because of the huge social programs brought in by communism. You talk about, this is a fascinating sentence, sick and tired of fighting with logical arguments against irrationality and an inhuman injustice ideology, the last bastion of blooming private industry was destroyed.
Yes.
And then the government apparently became larger than the private sector. So do you see this happening here now?
I mean, the best picture we have just had behind us in the last 20 months. What happens was, with that shutdown, these lockdowns, all these small businesses are at the edge or already bankrupt, right? What happens is the only chance for you to buy stuff now is with the large shipping corporations like Amazon, right? Those online, huge international corporations, they are still there and they have grown. And this is the same system. Okay. So because what I think what happens in the United States is your government is controlled by the corporations.
Lobbyists.
Call it lobbyists, but this is the representatives of the corporations control your government.
So did this happen quickly, or has it been eking in a little at a time?
In East Germany, it was kind of the East German communists had a problem, as I said before, with that huge increase in wealth and lifestyle in West Germany. So they didn't touch the private corporations, the private company, family-owned companies. They didn't touch them immediately. Only large corporations were were nationalized. But the smaller companies, mainly family-owned, they didn't touch them immediately. But there was a increasing influence from the other communist countries, especially from Poland and Czech Republic and so on, because these private or personal-owned, family-owned companies appeared or made East Germany appearing to be more rich than Poland or Czech Republic or whatever. And that more rich was considered, we won the war and these guys are better off than we. That can't be. Why is that? Because you still have private-owned corporation. You can't have that. In social, that's a no-no in communism.
Okay.
Because communism totally says no private means of production and manufacturing. So that was the point where the East German communists became such a pressure, get such a pressure from the Soviet Union at the end, that they started to undermine those businesses first over about a year and a half by reducing the supply line, increasing the interest rates for credits, business credits and all what you need. And then at the end, this didn't work really as they wanted. They started to send in provocateurs to create situations where the state security police could go in and arrest the owners and then nationalize.
So you have a line in the book that the communists use: "Who is not with us is against us."
Yes.
Okay, so as we wrap up this first segment, when we saw this happen here in our nation last year, what could have happened to have stopped that? Could our government officials, our local, even our state legislature, stepped up and done something to prevent it? I mean, when you saw Walmart open and the little guy closing, what were you thinking? Am I living my life all over again?
Yes, I'm in a, what do you call that?
Like a time zone?
Like a time zone. The Groundhog Day, right?
Yeah, Groundhog Day.
I feel like that. Yeah. They could have.
How
they
could
didn't
they
want.
have?
They
Okay,
didn't want.
in 60 seconds, can you tell us what they could have done to have prevented
10th Amendment.
The 10th Amendment, nullification.
Yeah.
Excellent. So the state, if we'd had a governor who was constitutional, could have said, we're not doing this.
Right, and your whole Congress, state Congress, could have said, hey, governor, no.
Okay, so it's all up to the state legislature. We have a few more seconds, right? My producer's telling we have one more minute. I'm so glad to be ending this first segment on this note. The state legislature has the authority. You understand right now with voter integrity, Election fraud, which we all knew happened, completely controlled by the state legislature. Don't expect Congress to do anything. They can't and they won't. Your state legislators need to be racing a bill through the House right this minute in Ohio, fixing the election system. We'll talk a little bit about this the next time. Please stay tuned, and we'll be back with another Patriot Life with Harald Zieger. See you next time.
So, we're one for